So I'm going to make this part one of a two-part video, because this video is just so you can make a decision whether you're going to use these NCY forks or not. I personally would not use them. I know you guys that are using them, they say it feels better. It feels better because you have you actually have some sag in there. Your forks are sagged down. When you hit those potholes and you hit those bumps, your fork drops down into it. It also comes up on the bumps, so it's a much better ride, and that's true. All right, so the part one video is to try to figure out if we're going to use these things or if you want to use them. Go over the pros. The pros are, they're a better quality fork. I did mic the steel uppers, the stanchions, and they're thicker. Even though they're 27 millimeters versus 31 millimeters, they don't look as cool. But if you keep these like 1980s dirt bike fork looking plastic cover things on there, then you're not going to notice that they're littler and spindlier. So the stanchion, upper stanchion is more quality. The aluminum parts are spun, or I guess forged aluminum, and then compared to this cast aluminum. So this aluminum is going to be a lot stronger on the NCY and not break like we've seen happen on the Gen 5s. So overall the fork is stronger. That's a plus. They look cooler. And they have enough travel that you get sag as well as you know, rollover on bumps. So it's going to ride better. They also, the other big plus I think, is it moves the trail down from 8 inches or 6 inches, I forget now, but it decreased that significantly. So the bike is going to handle better. It's going to handle better because of that sag, and it's going to handle better because of that trail. It's going to feel better, more responsive, and quicker. So that's a great deal. But let's go over the negatives. On the negatives, I'm using the look again. Here's a picture of the bracket, and this is nothing against Dave on Etsy. He's an awesome guy, but I just think this bracket, we have to turn the forks around to put the brake on the left side to get, or the right side to get full travel. I'm going to call that a negative just because I don't think it looks cool with the brake in the front. I'm sure it works just as fine, but I just don't think it looks cool. And so that, I guess that goes under the looks. The negative on the NCY is they're undersprung, which is way too soft for any kind of rider. I'm going to see if I can find stiffer springs. If anyone makes stiffer springs that little. I haven't seen springs that little, but who knows, maybe. Stock fork has a much bigger strut, much sturdier, and the NCY fork is, you know, 27 millimeters. It's tiny. I'm not sure how much I trust that. Negative is the spacers. You have to get different spacers for the front wheel. It doesn't actually fit in there. It's not plug and play at all. And the big negative is the cost. I don't think you're getting that much for the cost. Everything you read on the internet and the forums about it has to be Buddy, Roughhouse forks, whatever. It's all bullshit. Lies, lies, lies. These forks are 31 millimeters up here. People sell reducers. All sorts of guys sell them. And they take you from 31 to 27. So as long as you either have 31 or 27 stanchions, your forks will fit on here. Once you pick a fork you like, based on length, color, whatever, doesn't matter. Whatever that fork's made for, your front end now becomes that. I made the mistake of purchasing genuine Buddy or Roughhouse 50 forks, because that's what everyone said to purchase. But that was a mistake. So now my front end is basically going to become a genuine Buddy or Roughhouse. I have to find parts that fit that, which means a caliper that fits that. And if I want to get bigger than a 155 rotor, which is stock on the genuine, I have to get an adapter to take me out the 200 millimeters, 220, or whatever it may be. This rotor is 180. If I were to do it again, and if I could have returned my forks, but Alan told me I couldn't, I would get the Honda Dio forks. And the Dio forks, the axle mounts down here, and there's a lot more options for NCY brackets that bring your brake out to 200 millimeters. And it doesn't matter
what wheel you have. 200 millimeters from the axle is 200 millimeters from the axle, or 220, or whatever you want your brake to be, 180. So that's what you would do. You would pretend you have a Honda Dio, and that's what I would go with, and then get Dio parts. Dio parts are cheaper, and there's more of them. Buddy and Roughhouse parts are limited. So the next issue is your brake rotor. This is obviously not going to be a Honda Dio or a Buddy or a Roughhouse brake rotor, but like I say, as long as it's the right diameter, that's all that matters around that axle. When you have to come in here and change these spacers and space this thing out, get the wheel in the right position with different spacers so the rotor lines up with the caliper. But that's probably the only custom adjustment that'll be needed. This rotor that fits on this wheel, assuming you're going to keep your stock 14-inch wheels from your Maddog, this is a 3-bolt 70 millimeter. So each of these bolts are 70 millimeters apart, and there's 3 of them. And you'll find that on Honda Ruckus. So if you search Ruckus brake rotors, you're going to find your rotors in all different sizes. So introduced the 14-inch wheel on the Maddog Generation 5. What they do with this, they reduce the travel by 10 millimeters. Now the ride is even crappier than the old stock Maddog because we're sitting at 20 millimeters of travel. And it is a harsh ride. So the logical answer seems to be, well, let's put NCY forks on it. Problem is NCY forks, they're going to hit the frame, they're going to hit the top. No bueno. The solution is spin your forks around, get the axle in front. It's going to give you the clearance back here to not hit your frame. It's still going to hit your fender, so you got to drop your fender, get rid of it, and it won't quite hit this bracket up here, which is exactly what Maddog did when they first introduced the Generation 5. And they limited the travel more to get that brake back on the left and behind the axle like it belongs. Put a suspension on your bike, it's no different than a carburetor. You wouldn't just slap a carburetor on there and not tune it. It might work, but it's not going to work that great. Anyone who races bikes knows the suspension is way more important than the engine. Racers will spend tons of money and countless hours tuning their suspension, and they'd rather have that with a stock motor than have a really fast motor with poor suspension. Good suspension is going to make them faster. So I want to tune the suspension for the bike. That's why it's kind of a 2-part video, and I'm doing both at the same time. The problem is I'm waiting for parts that I've ordered, so and still looking for some parts. So this is just to see if we want to use them or not, like I said. But you'll see these marks here, 50, 60. I think I have 42 millimeters and 45 millimeters. Also, you'll see in the video. Pay no mind to all those. Just 60 is all we care about, and that 60 is 63 millimeters. That's the travel on these things stock. You'll also hear me talk about topping springs and bottoming springs. Pay no mind to that for this video. We'll get into that in the next video. These have topping springs in them. They're basically so when you take off real fast and the forks unload, and this part comes up higher, it doesn't make a metal clunking sound in here. As far as bottoming springs, I was trying something with valve springs to put in there to make the bottom spring rate slower. I'm going to check something called sag, or race sag, or rider sag. Many names for it, but it's important. The stock Maddog has no sag. Everyone understands the point of suspension is to, when you hit a bump, the tire can go up so your body doesn't go up, and it makes the ride smoother. But that's actually only half a suspension. There's also, when you hit a hole, the wheel goes down, the rider does not go down, and the suspension is smoother. If you want suspension smoothness when you hit holes and not just bumps, you have to have something called sag. And the stock forks don't have sag. That's one of the biggest issues with them. The springs are too stiff.
Looks like these NCY forks do have rider sag, so it's going to make a lot smoother ride. I have no doubt about that. And I'm going to measure the sag for what we got. The sag should be 1/3 of your suspension travel. And that's whether you're racing a motocross bike or whether you're on a Formula super bike screaming around Daytona. That's a starting point. We have a sag. I'll call that a race sag. That's with my weight on it and the bike's weight. It should be fully clothed, blah, blah, blah. But the race sag, you want 1/3. And we had a race sag of 30 millimeters. And we were trying to shoot for 30%. So these forks are too undersprung for this bike. That's a fact. There's another measurement called static sag, and that's with just the bike itself, the weight of the bike itself. And suspension gurus use static sag to figure out what weight springs to put in there, but honestly, users don't. We don't run static sag. We just care about race sag and max travel. Look at that static sag. 9.4 millimeters. So I'm just going to take a ballpark guess and say to use these forks, these NCY forks on a Gen 5 Maddog, or probably any Maddog, they all weigh about the same. I would say if you weighed 30 pounds with all your gear on, it'd be perfect. So yeah, if you're a Smurf, go for it. So it looks like stock. This thing sits about 6.5 inches off the ground. Okay, with the NCY fork, try to get an unweighted ground clearance measurement like we did last time, and honestly, that did not change that much. That looks about 6.25, 6.5. I can't see it. When I watch the video, maybe I'll see it. So I thought the one advantage to these Roughhouse forks would be that the spacers fit. The wheel would be the same size with the spacers on it. So here's the wheel placing the forks. I don't know if you can see the spacer gap in there, but it's a pretty big gap. Of course, putting different spacers in is no big deal, but we'll have to make up this gap right here with more spacers. And I would not even try to spacer this wheel correctly at this time. I'd wait till I have the caliper you're going to use and the adapter plate, because that will give you some movement in this disc here, and then you can spacer the disc to match the caliper and bolt it on to try to make the caliper mounting not so janky. So you'll most likely need 12 millimeter spacers on both sides, because the chances of one being the right size is going to be pretty slim. So expect to custom order those on eBay. You'll be into those for about 30 more bucks, but you can get them cut any size you want. How I'm measuring travel, I've got one of these tube clamp situations. I put the fork in there, I run a zip tie down on it, and turn till it stops. This fork has a lot of travel, too much for that Gen 1 with the 14-inch wheel. There's full compression. We're going to release this and then measure that compression. NCY does not publish their fork travel specs, so you have no idea. So I'm testing this out. There's max travel. Let's see what it is in millimeters. That is 63 millimeters. That's a lot of travel. If you hit a bump and you have that front brake on, we want to make sure that you won't hit your bike and lose control and crash down the highway. We're going to pull the springs out of these forks and these NCYs, and we're going to find out how much travel we can do until they hit. See if we can get full travel. Not heavy enough to squish the forks down. And for that last test we did with the race sag, I weigh 190 pounds. So if that gives you any indication. So these are way too undersprung for me. So remember, these Roughhouse 50, Buddy 50 forks are made for a Roughhouse 50 or a Buddy 50. That bike weighs a lot less than your Mad Dog. And I'm guessing the riders that ride those weigh a lot less. Just saying. There's nothing special about these forks, trust me. You'll see what I'm talking about when I talk about the spindly little spring. Look at this little spring. That's tiny. That's tiny compared to the spring in your Mad Dog. I mean, it's tiny. Look how little round that is. Remember the one in the Mad Dog was about, if you watch any of my other fork videos, I take apart Gen 1 springs and I take apart Gen 4 forks and Gen 1 forks, and the difference is phenomenal. This is way too undersprung for this bike. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, but I've got them on mine and they work awesome. Best mod ever. Yeah, they're better than stock for right now. They're a little bit better than stock because they have that sag. Your wheel is going down into holes and it's coming up out of the holes, and your body's not. That's why it feels better. They've got the Gen 5 forks so tight, there is no sag. And you're probably asking, why do the Gen 5 forks work so terrible? Well, Icebear Maddog, whatever, Icebear, they're a US supplier for Chinese products, obviously. And you probably got feedback from the customers. They wanted 14-inch wheels on it. And to put the 14-inch wheels on it, they had to limit the travel. And they just limited the travel on a standard fork. And how'd they limit the travel? They put this huge spacer tube in there. And a little teeny spring. So here's your little spring. And there's your spring. You can see how tiny it is. There's nothing to that spring, right? That's crazy. But look how much more significant it is in this spring. That NCY spring is way too small for what we're doing. The spring should be this size. It just should be longer. It can't be longer or the darn thing will hit. But my theory is they made this for the worst case scenario. If we can run a smaller tire, lower profile, grab a ½ inch there, and if we can do some tuning to the fork, we can actually run a longer spring and get more travel before we hit, and we can tune it for our weight. Or because of that little teeny spring that we have, we get metal to metal contact whenever we bottom out. And I think that's what's breaking these forks. Right, the springs are out so we can check clearance, and surprisingly it wasn't the frame that hit first. I was wrong on that. It's hard to tell at those angles, but it's darn close. It might be touching. But what actually hit was the fender. These bolts represent my fender right here, and those are the ones that are hitting first. We're getting, what, 32.5 millimeters of travel. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Well, we can get more clearance on this tire if we spin that fork around and put the brake on the right side. We're going to try that too. But while we try it, I'm going to talk about trail. So trail affects motorcycle handling. It affects it so much, in fact, that it's regulated by the DOT. There's a minimum and maximum trail. The maximum is actually huge because, you know, you got choppers and whatnot. But the minimum is 2 inches, I think. A sport bike is usually 2 inches to 4 inches. A big cruiser like a Goldwing is over 4 inches. And trail is the distance from your tire contact point under the axle to the extended, I don't know what you call this, steering angle off the axle. Alright, I have my stock forks back on, and I forgot to measure the trail on the stock forks to compare with the NCYs. It should be about the same, I would think. And this is race sag, which is 0 on this bike because the suspension's so stiff to try to keep it from compressing. And there, and the way we ride it, you're talking about an 8-inch trail. So that's one advantage the NCY forks have over it. They're a shorter distance, so it gives you, when you take into account for the rake and everything, the shorter distance brings the front of the bike down. It actually decreases the rake because the bike's leaning forward, and that gives you a shorter trail. How it affects handling is more trail is stable, less trail is not stable. So a sport bike wants less trail, and a cruiser wants more trail. If you've ever taken a rice rocket through a sweeper at about 130 miles an hour, it'll start bucking on you. And the reason it's bucking is because the bike is too stable. You're trying to turn a bike that's trying to be stable. And if you've experienced a bucking bike, that's what that's doing. You've got a stable bike that you're trying to make unstable in a turn. And you can adjust your trail with your fork angle via your headsets if you're on certain tracks that are tighter, and alleviate some of that bucking. But when you get it down to a certain point, so this is a nice long trail, when you get that trail down to a certain point where it's too short, now you run into the problem of tank slappers. You got a real maneuverable bike, but the tank slappers come on real quick, the bike wears you out, it's just tiring to ride. There's kind of a happy medium, and this bike obviously has a lot of trail. And this bike does buck around corners 5 3/4 inches. So that's definitely Goldwing territory right there. If you're used to racing a sport bike and you come out of a corner, if you don't trail brake and get your front end down, you'll have too much trail, so the bike will feel too stable through the turn, and you will you'll want to push the back end around. So you'll grab a fistful of throttle and slide that back tire around and bring the bike back into turn. When you get on these weak ass bikes like this that don't have any horsepower, you can't slide that back wheel. You're not going to grab a bunch of throttle and do that. So when you add throttle, it raises the front of the bike. It actually increases trail, and it makes the bike even more stable. So you swing wide and you go off into the ditch, or you go into the oncoming lane and hit a car. That's why they limit the maximum trail. Too much stability can be bad in the corner. It can be dangerous. Oh, and I'm measuring trail at a race sag with you sitting on the bike where it compresses to. And with the axle forward, of course, we're going to increase the trail, and we're going to increase it, looks like about, not that bad, about 1/2 inch or so. The trail went out, and it's now measuring 6 1/4. So 6.25 with the axle forward, not what I would like. I would like somewhere around 5 1/2 to 5 inches. That's a nice stable cruising bike, but it's still fun. You can still hit the corners with it. It still feels good. All right, so there's our maximum travel, or I should say the forks have been flipped around backwards. I didn't actually switch the forks. I just turned them both around. It's the same effect. In this case, the brake would be on the right side and the brake would be facing forwards. So not a very cool look, but it is the only way this mod can be done. Using NCY forks. I learned that from Dave, who makes the plate and he's the guy on Etsy that makes a plate, and he explained to me that the forks have to be flipped around to do this mod. The brake has to be on the right and in front, which is a damn shame because I waited for a Gen 5 to buy one until they put the fork on the left and facing rearwards. I did not want that front facing brake. I didn't know that until Dave told me. I never read that on the forums. Alan didn't indicate that at Mad Dogs. And when I told Alan I learned that I didn't want the forks, Alan wouldn't take them back. He told me to sell them on the forum. So here I am stuck with these stupid forks. But we're gonna find out what they do. So you guys probably saw this coming, obviously. We didn't change anything on that fender clearance. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. We flipped the fork around like they recommend, and obviously we're gonna hit the fender at the same point, so we're stuck at 30 millimeters. But we did gain all this clearance back here, and that's important. So we can lose the fender altogether, and we can gain more travel. So let's do that. So you can see we're not close to 60. The wheel hits the frame. That's what's limiting us on the axle rear. We've got plenty of clearance up here still with no fender on it. And now we'll try it with the axle flipped around. So we're going to put the brake on the right side and the axle forward. Okay, we've got the brake on the right side. We've got the axle forward. And we're going to check limiting again. I already know through preload spacers I can limit this fork at 50. But it's been this test has taken such a long time to do. I've pulled these forks apart several times. And that's the factory limit right there. That 61 is actually 63. It's a 63 millimeters. And we do have clearance, barely. So I was wrong about that. I thought it would hit. Plenty of clearance in the back. So 60 works as long as all your fender and your bracket are gone. You can leave it in the stock form. But because of the sag issue, I'm gonna try to limit mine to 50 and get rid of that race sag. So would I do the NCY fork mod? Absolutely not. Am I gonna do it? Hell yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make a video on it. And my goal is to get the NCY forks on there. My goal is to make them look clean with that brake going forward. I want to try to get a cool look. I've ordered a floating disc brake for it, 200 millimeters, so that's going to look cool. I've ordered an NCY caliper, and that's going to look cool. And then I'm trying to find a bracket that puts the two together and that brings an NCY caliper to a Roughhouse or Buddy 50 fork. And that's the bracket I'm kind of missing right now. I've got one, but it's back ordered. So when I get those parts, I'll make a video on doing this NCY fork, and I'll try to make it look real clean. And I'm also, in that time, I'm going to try to find stiffer springs for it so we can get it working like it should. This bike is just too heavy, and if you're a heavy rider, it's going to be way too heavy. So stay tuned for part 2.